This is the MD Minolta Rokkor-X 50mm macro lens F3.5. Let's get into it. Okay, now let's get started with the build quality. The build quality of this lens is excellent. It's made out of a combination of metals, plastic, and rubber. The aperture ring is made out of plastic. It has hard click stop, and you could also, on top of setting it on the click stop, on its marked aperture numbers to be more specific, you can also have hard stops in between as well, which is kind of handy. Not something I would use personally, but cool. Okay, now let's move on to the focusing ring. It's made out of rubber. It's stiff, smooth, and precise. This, like the other Minolta lenses I've tested, this is perfect for precise focus adjustments like you find on a macro lens. If the focusing ring turns too smoothly or too quickly, it makes it very hard to do fine focus adjustments. The lens has a metal lens mount, but it does not have a weather sealing gasket. The rear element of the lens is recessed deeply into the lens body, which means it's going to be much harder to cause flaring issues, and the glass element is protected some. Let's get into the lens's technical specifications now. The lens is 3 inches high. The lens is 8 inches around. The lens weighs 0.60 ounces. Distance is about 4 inches without the adapter, and with the adapter it's about 2 inches. The adapter weighs 0.30 ounces. The adapter, like the lens, is 8 inches around. The adapter is 1.5 inches high. And last but not least, the lens takes a 55mm filter thread. Okay, now that we're done with the build quality and the lens's technical specifications, let's move on to the image quality testing. We're going to perform 4 different image quality tests. We're going to start out with the hard light test because most lenses will perform excellent in hard contrasting light. And then we're going to give it a challenge by doing a low light test. And then onwards to the macro test at its closest focusing distance with the adapter and without the adapter. And without any further ado, let's get started with the hard light test now. Let's pop on over the Lightroom. And let's get started at F3.5. Let's look in the center of the image. See good softness and good contrast. On over to the corners. The corners look about the same as the center. That's excellent. And the other great thing to note about the image quality, there's no chromatic aberration. Excellent. Let's move on to F5.6. Let's look in the center of the image. We see good softness and good contrast. Let's peek at the corners. They look about the same. Let's move on to the middle of the aperture range to F8. We see a boost in sharpness and contrast. Let's go over and look at the corners, and we see a slight boost in sharpness and contrast. Let's move on to 11. Let's look in the center of the image. We see a boost in contrast and sharpness. It's only a slight one, but it's definitely there. And we're just going to slide over once again, look at the corners, and the corners look great. Let's move on to F16. Let's move over and look in the center of the image, and things look very nice indeed. And we're just going to slide over and look at the corners, and I think those corners also look good. Let's move on to the minimum aperture opening of F22. And most impressively, it's maintaining its sharpness. And let's slide on over and look at those corners, and those corners are holding up spectacularly. Okay, now let's move on to the low light test and see how this lens does. Let's hop into Lightroom. Let's start at F3.5. Let's move on now to look in the center of the image. I did not miss focus. As you will see when I drop down to F5.6, you will see a massive improvement in image quality, but let's stick right here for right now. Let's go on over and look at the corners. Yeah, this is kind of disappointing, but then again, it's not really designed to be a low light lens. Grant you, F3.5 is still brighter than F4, but you want a lens that is at least F2.8 for low light shooting. If not F1.8 or a F1.4 or a F1.2. But we're going to slide over and look in the corners, and they look about the same. Let's move on to F5.6. And as you can see, even without zooming in, we already see a massive boost in sharpness and contrast. I don't think the image quality is all that spectacular, but this is definitely usable. And at f5.6, if you're going to be using this lens in low light, you're definitely putting this on a tripod and you're definitely using really slow shutter speeds. So forget about trying to photograph any movement with this lens. Come on, corners, how are you looking? They look good. Not much to say about them. Let's move on to f8. Let's move into the center of the image. We see good softness and good contrast. Come on, corners. They also look good. Let's move on to f11. Wow, there appears to be another boost in sharpness and contrast. Very nice. Hello, corners. What do we got going on? They also look really good. Let's move on to S16, and it's time to look in the middle of the image. Things still look really good. No signs of diffraction yet. Excellent. Come on, corners. They still look excellent, even the very extreme corners. Let's move on to its minimum aperture opening of f22, and let's look in the middle of the image. We see a slight reduction in image quality, but things still look really good. Let's see if the corners are holding up. They're also holding up. That's great. Alrighty now. This is the reason you came here. We're going to perform the macro test now. Starting at f3.5. Even without zooming in, we can see excellent sharpness and contrast, and I did not notice this bit of dirt over here where I was photographing. I decided to leave it in and not retake the photos to show the scale of the thing. Behind it is my little Littleman Bond multi-tool. I left it in to show the scale of the coin. Let's start out wide open at a 3.5. But let's zoom in the center of the image. Well, excellent news. This lens was designed to have its best image quality at its closest focusing distance, and excellent news, it most certainly does. I'm pretty sure it is out-resolving the 24 megapixel sensor. As you can see, it's excellently sharp corner to corner. Very nice. Let's move on to f5.6. And let's zoom in. I think sharpness looks about the same, but I think there was a slight boost in contrast. Very nice indeed. Let's move on now to f8. Let's look in the center of the image. Honestly, at f8, I can't see any difference in image quality. Contrast looks good and sharpness looks good. Let's move on to f11. And we don't see any signs of diffraction. There's no improvement in image quality stopping it down. Let's see if that changes a little bit when we move on to f16. Alright, at f16, I tell you a difference in image quality. Things just look really good. We have a little bit more depth of field to work with because the lens is stopped down. I can't really notice any difference in the lens's image quality. Let's move on to f22 now. It's excellently sharp corner to corner. Very nice. Okay, now it's time to move on to doing the image quality test with the 1-to-1 adapter. Let's launch Lightroom and take a look at a 3.5. As you can see, the field of view is much narrower, and the depth of field is super shallow now, as you can see. But good news is the center of the image is still excellently sharp. Let's move on to f5.6. Look in the center of the image. Things look about the same. That's excellent. Moving on now to f8. We see another boost in sharpness. Slight boost, grant ya. But things are still looking good. Let's move on to f11. Things still look good. I think there's a slight boost in sharpness and contrast. Let's move on to s16. We have more depth of field to work with. Sharpness still looks very good. Let's move on to F22. Look in the center of the image, and things still look excellent. Very good, Minolta. Okay, now, let's do my custom vignetting and distortion test. Typically speaking, in my other lens reviews, we just looked at the vignetting and distortion chart, but we're going to look at the distortion separately, and we're going to judge the vignetting by looking at this piece of white ceiling here. Because it's not really coming through on my chart the level of vignetting this lens has wide open. So let's start with the distortion. As you can see, there's not really any distortion to speak of on this lens. The lines are basically nice and flat and straight. There might be the hintest about distortion, but as far as I'm concerned, they're basically this straight. Excellent. This is exactly what you want in a macro lens for doing product photography. You don't want your subject to look bowed or have pincushion distortion so it looks pinched. Okay, now let's launch Lightroom once again. Let's start wide open at F3.5. As you can see, the vignetting's kind of heavy. As we click down to F5.6, you can see the vignetting is much more reduced. We stop down to F8, there's not really much of an improvement. Then we just continue down, there's not really much of an improvement in vignetting past F8. It's always there, but once it's stopped down to F8, it's very subtle and, luckily for us, more or less straightforward to get rid of in post. And just like that, no more vignetting. The only downside to doing this is that it uses up a lot of the dynamic range the camera captures to remove the vignetting. But hey, it's not that big of a deal to get rid of, and in a lot of situations it can be quite useful, like for portraits, because it creates a nice emphasis on your subject. Okay, now let's move on to the focus breathing test. You can see, and unsurprising, the lens suffers from extreme focus breathing. This is very typical for a macro lens, and given the fact that you're going to be using this to focus on things up close at its closest focusing distances, having the focal length be actually larger at the long end of its focusing range is actually great. Not so great for general photography, but this isn't a general purpose photography lens. It's a highly specialized tool that can also do general photography. Okay, now let's move on to the flaring and ghosting test. Thanks to the front element being recessed so deeply inside the lens body, it's actually able to handle flaring very well. As you can see, this using a normal flashlight. However, when I use my extremely bright hat light here, this is 172 lumens, it's only then where we really start to notice ghosting. And it only really does that when you aim this basically directly into the front of the lens, which a modern lens would struggle to. But the good news is the flaring does look pretty. Bad news is that it's flaring, but it's doing pretty well for a macro lens. Excellent. Now for my conclusions. Who do I think this lens is for? Yes, it doesn't let in as much light as my other Minolta Rokkor lens does, this f1.2, but it's not its intended purpose. It is a macro lens, and I can't recommend this enough. It is crazy sharp where it counts. It's light enough and small enough that you could easily carry it around in your camera bag without much hassle. The only real pain is that 1-to-1 adapter that is very difficult to get a hold of nowadays with the lens. Like I said, I got lucky and managed to get a hold of the adapter. But all in all, there isn't much to complain about. It's got great image quality, and it does come highly recommended. Thank you for watching. If you want to support the channel, please like and subscribe, and turn the bell notification on. You can follow me on Facebook and Instagram. You can support me on Redbubble, Society6, and Adobe Stock.